The great chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy. Hundreds of alien beings filled the massive space, their bodies ranging from towering insectoids to small floating jellyfish-like creatures. The air shimmered with translation, fields and holographic displays creating a rainbow of colors that danced across the crystalline walls. Captain Jake Morrison sat quietly in the human observation pod, a simple glass booth tucked away in one corner of the chamber. He wore his standard blue uniform, clean but not fancy, and held a basic tablet in his hands. Around him, alien representatives gestured wildly with tentacles, claws, and appendages he couldn't even name. Their voices rose and fell in waves of excitement and anger. Morrison tapped his stylus against the tablet screen and glanced at his watch. The meeting had been going on for 3 hours now, and he still had paperwork to finish back on his ship. He hoped they would get to the point soon. High Counselor Zethrak rose from his platform at the center of the chamber. The insectoid alien stood nearly 10 feet tall, his black carapace gleaming under the chamber's lights. Forearms spread wide as he began to speak, his voice amplified through the translation system. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Zethrak's voice boomed through the chamber. "We gather today to address a threat to our peaceful civilization, a species that spreads across the stars like a plague, bringing violence and chaos wherever they go." Morrison looked up from his tablet with mild interest. He had heard this speech before, or at least versions of it. Someone was always calling humans violent or dangerous. It came with the territory. "The humans," Zethrak continued, pointing one of his clawed hands toward Morrison's booth, "have shown their true nature time and again. They attack peaceful traders. They fortify their colonies like military bases. They teach their children to use weapons before they can properly walk." A ripple of concerned chittering and warbling spread through the chamber. Several smaller aliens huddled together in their pods, their large eyes turning toward Morrison, with what looked like fear. Morrison scrolled through his tablet, checking the latest shipping schedules from Earth. The harvest season was starting soon, and cargo ships would need to adjust their routes. He made a note to remind the transport office. "Only last month," Zethrak's voice rose higher. "Human colonists on Kepler 438b destroyed 3 of our survey ships. They claimed self-defense, but we know the truth. Humans are a warrior race that cannot be trusted." Morrison frowned slightly and looked up. He remembered that incident. Pirates had been raiding survey ships for months, stealing equipment and selling it on the black market. The human colonists had finally gotten tired of it and shot down 3 ships that refused to identify themselves and ignored all hails. It turned out 2 of them were legitimate survey vessels that had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The human colony had sent formal apologies and paid for repairs to the damaged ships. They had even helped track down the real pirates afterward. Morrison wondered if Zethrak had forgotten to mention that part. "They multiply like insects," another alien voice called out from across the chamber. This one belonged to Ambassador Krelix, a slug-like being who spoke through a mechanical translator attached to his throat. "Every year, more human ships appear. In our space. Every year, they claim more worlds for themselves." Morrison almost smiled at that. Humans did tend to have large families, and they did like to explore. But the galaxy was a big place. There was room for everyone. "We have tried diplomacy," Zethrak continued, his forearms gesturing dramatically. "We have offered treaties and trade agreements, but humans respond only to strength. They understand only violence." The chamber erupted in agreement. Aliens of dozens of species clicked, chirped, and roared their approval. Some banged their appendages against their pod walls. Others flashed bright colors or released clouds of scented gas. Morrison checked his messages while he waited for the noise to die down. His wife Lisa had sent him a photo of their daughter's soccer game. The kid had scored 2 goals and looked proud as anything in her muddy uniform. He smiled and sent back a thumbs-up emoji. "Therefore," Zethrak's voice cut through the din, "the Galactic Council, by majority vote of 13 member species, hereby declares a state of war against the human species and all their colonies, settlements, and vessels." The chamber fell silent for a moment, then exploded in cheers and celebration. Aliens jumped and danced and made noises Morrison had never heard before. Some released what looked like confetti made of scales, or shed skin. Morrison looked up from his tablet and blinked. Had they just declared war? He replayed the last few minutes in his head to make sure he had heard correctly. Yes, they had definitely declared war. He made a note on his tablet. War declared. Notify Earth Command. Then he went back to reviewing the shipping schedules. The grain convoy from New Iowa would need to be rerouted through the Vega system to avoid the usual patrol routes. Zethrak raised his arms for silence. The celebration gradually died down as the aliens turned their attention back to the High Counselor. Captain Morrison, Zethrak's voice carried across the chamber. You have heard our declaration. What is humanity's response to this grave matter? Morrison looked up and realized that every alien in the chamber was staring at him. Hundreds of eyes, compound eyes, eye stalks, and other sensory organs all focused on his small booth. The translation fields hummed quietly as they waited for his answer. He cleared his throat and stood up, brushing a piece of lint off his uniform jacket. Well, Morrison said, his voice calm and steady. I'll make sure to pass along your message to Earth Command. They'll probably want to review the details and get back to you with an official response. The silence stretched on for several seconds. Morrison could hear the hum of the chamber's life support systems and the distant sound of traffic outside the building. That's it? Zethrak's translator struggled with what sounded like confusion. That is your response to a formal declaration of war, Morrison shrugged. I'm just the military liaison. I don't make policy decisions. Earth Command will want to look over your declaration, maybe run it past the legal department, and then send you an official reply. Probably take about 72 hours, maybe a bit longer if it falls on a weekend. More silence. Morrison could see aliens looking at each other with what he assumed was bewilderment. Some were making rapid gestures that their translators couldn't keep up with. You do understand, Ambassador Krelik spoke up, his mechanical voice crackling slightly, that we have just declared war on your entire species? Yeah, I got that part. Morrison nodded. Like I said, I'll pass it along. Is there anything else on the agenda? I've got a supply manifest to review before my next shift. The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Aliens turned to their neighbors, speaking rapidly in their native languages. The translation systems gave up trying to keep up and simply provided a low hum of background noise. Morrison sat back down and returned to his tablet. The Centauri medical supply run was scheduled for next Tuesday, but they might need to adjust. The route depending on how Earth Command wanted to handle this war business. He made another note to check with the navigation office. High Counselor Zethrak leaned forward in his platform, his compound eyes fixed on Morrison's booth. Captain Morrison, he said slowly, do you not understand the gravity of this situation? We have mobilized 13 fleets. We have prepared for total war. We have the combined military might of dozens of worlds ready to strike at humanity. Morrison looked up again and nodded politely. That sounds like a lot of work. I hope you didn't go to too much trouble. He glanced at his watch. Look, I really do need to get back to my ship. The duty officer is expecting my report by 1800 hours, if there's nothing else. He stood up again and gathered his tablet and a small bag containing his lunch, which he had not had time to eat. Permission to return to my vessel? Morrison asked, as if he were leaving a routine briefing rather than a declaration of galactic war. The chamber had gone completely silent again. Morrison could almost feel the confusion radiating from hundreds of alien minds trying to process what they had just witnessed. Zethrak's mandibles clicked together several times before he managed to speak. Permission, granted, he said finally. Morrison nodded and headed for the exit. As he reached the door, he turned back to the chamber. Oh, and thanks for the formal notification. It's always better to have these things in writing. The door slid shut behind him, leaving the Galactic Council sitting in stunned silence. The message reached Earth exactly 18 hours after Captain Morrison left the Galactic Council chambers. It arrived through the usual diplomatic channels, marked with standard priority flags, and landed on the desk of President Kate Sullivan. During her morning coffee, Sullivan read through the formal declaration of war while eating a blueberry muffin. She paused occasionally to make notes in the margins with a red pen. When she finished, she called her secretary. "Get me General Turner and the Security Council in the Situation Room," she said. "Also, can someone bring more coffee? It's going to be a long day." The Situation Room beneath the White House filled with the usual faces. General Frank Turner arrived first, carrying a thick folder and wearing the same calm expression he brought to every crisis. Secretary of Defense Tony Rodriguez followed, along with Admiral Grace Lee from Space Command and Dr. Amy Collins from the Xenobiology Department. "So," President Sullivan said, settling into her chair at the head of the table, 13 alien species have declared war on us. Frank, what's our current readiness status?" General Turner opened his folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "All systems green, Madam President. Reserve units are already being activated through the standard protocols. No emergency mobilization needed." "How long until we're ready?" Sullivan asked. "We've been ready since Tuesday," Turner replied. "The Titan defense grid came online last month and the colonial militias ran their quarterly drills 2 weeks ago. Admiral Lee can give you the fleet status." Admiral Lee leaned forward. "All active ships are operational. The new batch of converted cargo vessels finished their upgrades yesterday. We can have a response fleet in position within 48 hours if needed." Sullivan nodded and turned to Dr. Collins. "Amy, what's your take on this?" "Why now?" Dr. Collins adjusted her glasses and consulted her tablet. "The alien coalition is led by the Zethrak Empire, which has been pushing for this for months. They see human expansion as a threat to their influence. The other 12 species are mostly followers, probably hoping to gain something from the conflict." "Any chance of negotiation?" Sullivan asked. "Unlikely," Collins replied. "They've committed too much politically. They need to see this through, at least until they realize what they're actually dealing with." President Sullivan stood up and walked to the large map display showing human space. Red dots marked the locations of alien fleets, while blue dots showed human colonies and installations. The red dots were clustered around the edges of human territory, clearly preparing for coordinated attacks. "Recommendations?" she asked. General Turner cleared his throat. "Standard defensive posture. Let them make the first move, respond proportionally, and document everything for the post-war tribunals. We should be able to wrap this up in a couple of weeks." "A couple of weeks?" Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "Their logistics are terrible," Admiral Lee explained. "They're trying to coordinate 13 different species with incompatible technology and command structures. We've been monitoring their communications, and half their fleets can't even talk to each other without translation delays." Sullivan returned to her seat. "All right then. Frank, activate Defense Protocol 7. Amy, I want hourly updates on alien fleet movements. Grace, make sure our people know this is a defensive action only. No preemptive strikes unless absolutely necessary." "What about the public announcement?" Rodriguez asked. Sullivan thought for a moment. "Keep it simple. We'll acknowledge the declaration, express regret that diplomacy failed, and assure everyone that appropriate defensive measures are being taken. Schedule it for this afternoon, right after the agriculture report." 3 hours later, President Sullivan stood at the White House podium facing a room full of reporters. She wore her standard blue suit and carried a single sheet of notes. "Good afternoon," she began. "I want to address the situation that has developed with certain members of the Galactic Council. This morning we received formal notification that 13 alien species have declared a state of war against humanity and our colonies." A murmur ran through the press corps, but Sullivan continued without pause. "We deeply regret that diplomatic efforts have failed to resolve the underlying concerns that led to this declaration. The United Earth government remains committed to peaceful coexistence with all sentient species, but we will take all necessary measures to defend our citizens and our territory." She looked up from her notes. "I want to assure everyone that appropriate defensive protocols have been activated, and our security forces are fully prepared to protect human interests throughout known space. We hope this situation can be resolved quickly and with minimal loss of life on all sides." A reporter raised her hand. "Madam President, How serious is this threat? Should citizens be concerned? Sullivan smiled slightly. Our defense analysts believe the threat is manageable. Citizens should continue with their normal activities. There's no need for emergency preparations or panic buying. The grocery stores have plenty of supplies. Another reporter spoke up. What about the space colonies? Are they in immediate danger? Our colonies have been advised of the situation and are taking appropriate precautions, Sullivan replied. Most of them have been preparing for this possibility for some time. I'm confident they can handle whatever comes their way. The questions continued for another 10 minutes, covering logistics, diplomacy, and economic impacts. Sullivan answered each one calmly and briefly, treating the war declaration like any other policy issue. Meanwhile, across human space, the news spread through normal channels. The major networks covered it as their lead story, but sandwiched it between weather reports and sports scores. Social media buzzed with commentary, but most of it focused on which alien species looked the strangest rather than any serious concern about the war. On the agricultural world of New Kansas, Governor Mike Johnson received the war notification while inspecting the wheat harvest. He read it twice, then called his security chief. Jerry, he said, you might want to check the missile silos. We might have visitors soon. Already done, Governor, Jerry replied. Ran the monthly test yesterday. Everything's green. Should I call up the militia? Johnson looked out at the golden wheat field stretching to the horizon. Combine harvesters moved slowly through the grain, their crews working steadily under the afternoon sun. Not yet, he said. Let's see what happens first. But maybe mention to folks that hunting season starts next month. Make sure everyone's got their licenses updated. On Haven Colony, Administrator Claire Adams was in the middle of a town hall meeting about the annual budget when her assistant handed her a tablet with the war declaration. She read it quickly, then returned to the budget discussion. As I was saying, she continued, the road repair fund needs another 50,000 credits, which we can take from the emergency reserve. Also, the Galactic Council has declared war on us, so we'll need to discuss security measures. But first, let's finish with the municipal water system upgrades. A hand shot up from the audience. Claire, did you just say war? Yes, 13 alien species have declared war on humanity, Adams replied matter-of-factly. We'll put it on next week's agenda, right after the discussion about the new playground equipment. Now, about those water pipes. The alien reconnaissance ships that arrived at human colonies over the next day found a puzzling sight. Instead of frantic military preparation or panicked evacuations, they observed normal daily life. Cargo ships continued their scheduled runs. Children went to school. Farmers tended their crops. Commander Ben Clark, captain of the USS Defender, received his war orders while docked at Luna Station for routine maintenance. He was in the middle of reviewing engineering reports when his communications officer handed him the encrypted message. War orders, the officer said simply. Clark read through the tactical briefings and fleet assignments. Standard defensive deployment. Rules of engagement clearly defined, logistics already arranged. He folded the papers and put them in his jacket pocket. When do we ship out? His first officer asked. Thursday morning, Clark replied. Right after, we finish the hull inspection. No point leaving with a maintenance issue. The alien coalition had expected to see massive fleets mobilizing, emergency broadcasts, and clear signs of a civilization preparing for total war. Instead, their scouts reported business as usual throughout human space. Trade continued. People went to work. Military units activated quietly and efficiently, but without drama or fanfare. High Counselor Zethrak received these reports in his command center on the Zethrak homeworld. He studied the intelligence summaries with growing confusion. Are they mocking us? He asked his intelligence chief. Unknown, High Counselor, came the reply. Human behavior patterns remain consistent with their normal operations. We detect no signs of panic or emergency mobilization. Zethrak's mandibles clicked together in frustration. Perhaps they don't understand the seriousness of our threat. Send more ships to their border systems. Make our presence known. As you command, High Counselor. But even as alien fleets moved into position around human space, the expected reaction never came. Humans simply noted their presence, filed the appropriate reports, and continued with their daily routines. The war had been declared, but somehow the humans had barely noticed. The alien fleet arrived at the Kepler 442 system with great fanfare. 13 different ship designs filled the space around the outer planets, their hulls gleaming with ceremonial markings and battle flags. The largest vessel, High Counselor Zethrak's flagship, broadcast a message on all frequencies. Humans of Kepler 442, the transmission began. You stand accused of crimes against galactic peace. Surrender your colonies and submit to Galactic Council authority or face the consequences. To demonstrate their power, the alien fleet targeted a large asteroid near the fourth planet. Dozens of energy beams struck the rock simultaneously, turning it into glowing debris that scattered across space. The display was impressive, visible even from the 3 human colonies in the inner system. Admiral Grace Lee watched the light show from the bridge of the USS Defender. She stood with her hands behind her back, studying the tactical display that showed the positions of all alien ships. Around her, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, monitoring communications and sensor readings. Admiral, her communications officer reported, the aliens are demanding a response to their surrender ultimatum. What's our ETA on the cargo convoy? Lee asked. 40 minutes, ma'am. Captain Martinez is running a bit behind schedule. Lee nodded. Tell the aliens we received their message and we're reviewing it. That should buy us some time. The human defense fleet consisted of 12 ships scattered throughout the system. Half were converted cargo vessels that still carried their original markings and registration numbers. The other half were proper military ships, but they looked small and ordinary compared to the alien fleet's imposing designs. Captain Steve Martinez piloted his ship, the former grain hauler now called Harvest Moon, through the asteroid field between the second and third planets. His crew of 8 included 2 former miners, a retired teacher, and his own nephew, who had joined up the previous month. Uncle Steve, the nephew called from the navigation station, I'm getting weird readings from those alien ships. Their formation doesn't make sense. Martinez looked at his displays. The alien fleet had arranged itself in what looked like a ceremonial pattern rather than a tactical one, pretty to look at, but not very practical for actual fighting. They're trying to look impressive, Martinez said. Let them. Just keep us on course for the rendezvous point. On New Hope Colony, Administrator Dan Phillips received an evacuation order from the alien fleet commander. He read it while eating lunch in his office, then called his security chief. Bob, he said, the aliens want us to evacuate the colony in 6 hours. What do you think? Security Chief Bob Wilson looked out the window at the busy colony streets. People walked to work, children played in the parks, and delivery trucks made their rounds. The underground shelters had been ready for weeks, but nobody seemed particularly worried. I think 6 hours isn't nearly enough time to pack properly, Wilson replied. Takes me longer than that just to find all my socks when I move. Phillips laughed. True. Send them a message saying we need at least 3 days to organize a proper evacuation. Maybe they'll get bored and go away. The alien fleet commander, a being called War Leader Thex, received the human response with confusion. 3 days? He had offered the humans a generous 6 hours to abandon their homes and flee. For their lives, what more could they possibly need? Perhaps they are stalling for time, his tactical officer suggested. Time for what? Thex asked. Their pathetic fleet couldn't challenge a single one of our ships. Unknown, War Leader. Human behavior remains illogical. Meanwhile, the human ships continued their quiet preparations. Captain Martinez finished loading his cargo holds with what looked like farming equipment, but was actually guided missiles disguised as irrigation pipes. The USS Defender moved slowly toward the outer system, appearing to retreat while actually positioning itself for a better attack angle. Lieutenant Nina Foster, serving her first tour aboard a combat vessel, watched the alien fleet through the ship's telescopes. She had expected her first battle to be more exciting somehow. Instead, it felt like preparing for a very dangerous but routine maintenance job. Ma'am, she said to Admiral Lee, why aren't they attacking yet? They're waiting for us to do something dramatic, Lee replied. probably expecting us to charge at them screaming war cries or something. Let them wait. The stalemate continued. For 2 hours. The alien fleet held position near the outer planets, occasionally broadcasting new surrender demands. The human ships moved slowly through the system, apparently going about their normal business. War leader Thex grew increasingly frustrated. "Fire a warning shot at their largest ship," he ordered. "Show them we mean business." A beam of energy lanced out from the alien flagship, passing just in front of the USS Defender's bow. "Admiral?" Lee didn't even change expression. "Did they just miss?" Lieutenant Foster asked. "No, that was intentional," Lee replied. "They're trying to scare us. How nice of them to show us their weapons' power output and firing sequence." She turned to her tactical officer. "Mark that energy signature. I want to know exactly how their shields are calibrated." The warning shot had the opposite effect that War Leader Thex intended. Instead of frightening the humans, it gave them valuable intelligence about alien weapons and defensive systems. Within minutes, every human ship in the system had the new data. Captain Martinez received the tactical update while maneuvering through a dense asteroid field. His ship's computers analyzed the alien weapon signatures and compared them to human defensive capabilities. "Well," he said to his crew, "looks like their shields won't stop our mining charges." His nephew looked confused. "Mining charges?" "Same explosive we use to break up asteroids," Martinez explained. "Except now we're going to use them on alien ships instead of rocks. Physics is physics." The battle began not with dramatic charges or heroic speeches, but with a simple miscalculation. War Leader Thex, growing impatient with human delays, ordered his fleet to advance on the colonies. He expected the human ships to either flee or mount a desperate defense. Instead, the humans did something completely unexpected. They went to work. Admiral Lee's fleet didn't engage in glorious ship-to-ship combat. They used precise, calculated strikes targeting specific weaknesses in alien ship designs. The converted cargo vessels launched their disguised missiles with the same accuracy they had once used to deliver supplies to space stations. Captain Martinez found himself in a dogfight with 3 alien cruisers. But instead of trying to outgun them, he used the same maneuvering skills that had helped him dock with rotating space stations during solar storms. He slipped between asteroids, used gravity wells to change direction, and led the aliens into areas where their larger ships couldn't follow. "This is just like threading the needle at Ceres Station," he told his crew, referring to a particularly tricky docking maneuver that cargo pilots practiced for years. His ship fired a spread of missiles that looked like they were aimed badly. But Martinez had calculated the trajectory perfectly. The missiles struck an asteroid, sending chunks of rock flying toward the alien ships at precisely the right angle to overwhelm their defensive systems. The alien cruisers found themselves dodging debris while trying to target a cargo ship that moved like it was still carrying a full load of grain to market. Across the system, similar scenes played out. Human pilots used civilian skills for military purposes. A former asteroid miner disabled an alien destroyer by hitting it with a magnetic grapple and spinning it like a piece of ore. A cargo captain who specialized in delicate equipment transport managed to capture an alien command ship by matching its rotation and docking with it before the crew realized what was happening. The most effective human weapon turned out to be their complete lack of military ceremony. They didn't announce their attacks or demand single combat. They simply identified problems and solved them efficiently. Dr. Ellen Hayes, the medical officer aboard the colony hospital ship, found herself treating both human and alien casualties as the battle continued. The aliens who were brought to her were confused and disoriented, unable to understand what had happened to their great fleet. "How?" one wounded alien officer asked through a translation device. "How did you defeat our superior technology?" Dr. Hayes looked up from bandaging the alien's injured appendage. "We didn't defeat your technology," she said simply. "We just used ours better." The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the great alien fleet was scattered across the system. Some ships had been captured, others disabled, and a few had simply surrendered when they realized they were outmatched. The human fleet had taken only minor damage, mostly from collisions with debris. War leader Thex found himself a prisoner aboard Captain Martinez's converted grain hauler, sitting in what had once been a cargo bay. He stared at the human captain who had defeated his flagship, using nothing more than farming equipment and asteroid mining techniques. "I don't understand," Thex said. "You have no honor, no ceremony, no warrior tradition." Martinez shrugged while filling out his after-action report. "We've got work to do," he said. "Honor doesn't grow crops or deliver supplies or keep the lights on. We do what needs doing, and we do it right the first time." The alien prisoners were treated well, fed regularly, and given medical attention, but they remained confused by the human approach to warfare. Where they expected cruelty or triumph, they found only professional competence and paperwork. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 18 days after the war declaration. The same crystalline chamber that had buzzed with excitement 3 weeks earlier now felt subdued and tense. Many of the alien representatives kept glancing nervously toward the human observation booth, where a new figure sat reading reports. Ambassador Rick Taylor wore a simple gray suit and carried a worn leather briefcase. He looked like an accountant or a middle manager, not a representative of the species that had just dismantled 13 alien fleets in less than 3 weeks. He occasionally made notes on a yellow legal pad with a cheap ballpoint pen. "High Counselor." Zethrak stood at his platform, but his earlier confidence had evaporated. His forearms hung limply at his sides, and his compound eyes kept darting between his fellow council members and the human booth. "Fellow beings," Zethrak began, his voice much quieter than before. "We gather today to discuss the recent developments in our conflict with humanity." Ambassador Taylor looked up from his notes and checked his watch. He had a conference call with the Agriculture Department in 2 hours and didn't want to be late. "The reports from our military commanders," Zethrak continued, "indicate that our initial assessments of human capabilities may have been incomplete." A ripple of uncomfortable shifting went through the chamber. Several smaller species huddled deeper into their pods. The triumphant excitement of 3 weeks ago had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. "In the interest of preventing further unnecessary bloodshed," Zethrak said carefully, "the Galactic Council would like to open negotiations for a peaceful resolution to this conflict." Taylor finished making a note about corn prices and looked up. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I was checking something." The chamber fell silent. Zethrak's mandibles clicked together several times before he spoke again. "We wish to negotiate an end to hostilities," he said. "Oh." Taylor nodded and flipped through his briefcase. "Actually, I have the paperwork right here. Earth Command figured you might want to discuss terms eventually." He pulled out a manila folder and opened it on his small table. The casual gesture sent another wave of nervous energy through the chamber. How long had the humans been preparing for this moment? "Before we get to that," Taylor said, adjusting his reading glasses, "I should probably clear up a few things about the war. I think there might be some confusion about what actually happened." Commander Julia Barnes, sitting in the military section of the human booth, activated a holographic display. Numbers and charts appeared in the air above the chamber floor, showing ship movements, battle outcomes, and casualty reports. "The conflict lasted 18 days, Taylor began, reading from his notes. "During that time, the alien coalition lost. 67 ships had 43 vessels captured and suffered approximately 2,000 casualties. Human losses included minor damage to 8 ships and 17 personnel injuries, mostly from people bumping into things during evasive maneuvers." The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. Several alien representatives made choking or gurgling sounds that their translators couldn't interpret. "Now," Taylor continued, "the reason for this disparity wasn't that humans are particularly warlike or aggressive. It's actually much simpler than that." He stood up and walked to the edge of his booth, addressing the chamber like a teacher explaining a basic concept to confuse students. "You see, we've been studying all of you for about 40 years now, every species in this council plus a few dozen others. We know your ship designs, your weapons, your tactics, your supply chains, and your command structures. We know which species don't get along with each other, and which ones are only here because they're afraid to say no." Ambassador Kralix, The slug-like being who had been so vocal 3 weeks earlier tried to speak but only managed a wet, gasping sound. "We're not particularly smart or strong or advanced," Taylor said. "We're just thorough. When we decided to join the galactic community, we figured we should understand what we were getting into. So we sent traders and diplomats and scientists, and they all had secondary jobs gathering information. The holographic display changed to show trade routes, diplomatic missions, and scientific exchanges spanning decades. What the aliens had thought were simple commercial relationships were revealed as comprehensive intelligence operations. Every time one of our cargo ships visited your worlds, the crew was taking notes. Every cultural exchange included military observers. Every scientific collaboration included technical assessments. We've been preparing for this possibility since we first left Earth." Captain Pete Collins, a grizzled freighter pilot who had been temporarily assigned to the diplomatic mission, stepped forward. "The thing is," Collins said in his rough voice, "we didn't want this war. Wars are expensive and wasteful and people get hurt. But once you declared it, we figured we might as well do it right." Dr. Alex Morgan, the team's anthropologist, activated another display showing economic data. "The war cost humanity approximately 3 billion credits, she reported. "That's less than we spend on road maintenance in a typical month. The alien coalition spent an estimated 40 billion credits on their military buildup, most of which is now scrap metal floating in various star systems." High Counselor Zethrak finally found his voice. "How is this possible? We had superior numbers, advanced technology, the combined might of 13 worlds." Taylor smiled politely. "You had ceremony. We had logistics. You focused on looking impressive. We focused on getting the job done. Big difference." He returned to his seat and opened his folder again. "Anyway, about those peace terms. Earth Command has prepared a very reasonable settlement. We'll return all captured ships and personnel in exchange for covering the repair costs for our damaged vessels. No territorial changes, no reparations, no ongoing obligations. Everybody goes back to what they were doing before this started." The chamber buzzed with confused chatter. The aliens had expected demands for tribute, territorial concessions, or at least some kind of punishment for declaring war. Instead, they were being offered what amounted to a return to the status quo. "There is one condition," Taylor added, consulting his notes. "All species involved in the declaration need to formally acknowledge that the war is over and that normal diplomatic relations are resumed. We'd prefer to avoid any confusion about our current status." Ambassador Krelix managed to work up enough courage to speak. "What assurance do we have that humanity won't seek revenge for this conflict?" Taylor looked genuinely puzzled. "Revenge for what? You declared war. We defended ourselves, now it's over. What's to revenge? Besides, we're too busy to hold grudges. Harvest season is starting and we've got 3 new colonies to establish next quarter." The matter-of-fact response seemed to confuse the aliens even more. They had built up humanity as either a great threat or a potential victim, but the reality was something they couldn't quite grasp. Humans were simply people trying to get their work done. Captain Collins stepped forward again. "Look, we get it. You were worried about human expansion, thought we might be dangerous, figured you better act first, happens all the time. But we're not going anywhere, and we're not trying to take over the galaxy. There's plenty of room out there for everybody." He gestured toward the chamber's viewing ports where stars twinkled in the distance. "We grew up on a planet where everything was trying to kill us for millions of years," Collins continued. "Predators, diseases, natural disasters, ice ages, you name it. Space is actually pretty relaxing by comparison. We're not looking for fights. We're looking for new places to live and work and raise our kids." The voting to end the war was unanimous. Every species that had declared war 3 weeks earlier now voted to resume peaceful relations. The ceremony took less than an hour, with each representative formally acknowledging the new peace treaty. As the session ended, High Counselor Zethrak approached the human booth. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by something that looked like respect mixed with bewilderment. "Ambassador Taylor," he said carefully, "I must ask, How did you prepare so thoroughly for a war that was only declared 18 days ago? Taylor packed his papers back into his briefcase and snapped it shut. We didn't prepare for this war, he replied. We prepared for any war. It's just good planning. He stood up and adjusted his tie. If you'll excuse me, I have a conference call about grain subsidies in 20 minutes. The farm lobby gets cranky when I'm late. As Taylor walked toward the exit, the chamber remained silent. The aliens sat in their pods trying to process what they had just witnessed. A species that treated galactic war like a minor scheduling inconvenience was beyond their understanding. The great doors closed behind the human delegation, leaving the Galactic Council to contemplate their new understanding of their human neighbors. Trade resumed within a week. The war became a footnote in history books, remembered mainly for how little it had disrupted human civilization. Life returned to normal across the galaxy, with one important difference. When making plans that might involve humanity, every species now checked their math twice and thought very carefully about what they were actually getting into. The humans, meanwhile, went back to their farms and factories and schools, barely pausing to celebrate their victory. There was work to do and the harvest wouldn't wait.